In this video segment we're going to take a look at our next chord progression, that is the 2-5-1 progression. You'll be relieved to hear that the information overload slackens off a little bit at this point, because as you will recall we've already examined the 1 chord and the 5 chord as part of our 1-4-5 chord progression. So in this session we'll just be learning one new type of chord, namely the 2 chord. So firstly let's have a brief recap, returning once again to our familiar C major scale. You'll recall that we formed the 1 chord by taking the first or tonic note of the scale and stacking alternate notes from the scale on top of that to form a major triad containing the intervals of a major third and a fifth. We then proceeded up the scale to note 5 for our 5 chord, which is once again built from alternate notes of the scale, giving us once again a major third and a fifth, forming another major triad. Okay, so to produce our 2 chord we simply apply the same process to the second note of the major scale. So we take alternate notes from the scale, that's notes 2, 4, 6, and there's our 2 chord. Now I'm sure your ear will tell you straight away that there's something different about that chord, and the difference lies in this first interval, which if we examine it we will see is 1 semitone smaller than the major third that we had on our 1 chord and our 5 chord. That means this interval is a minor third. To generalise, a major interval reduced by 1 semitone becomes the corresponding minor interval. A minor interval raised by 1 semitone becomes the corresponding major interval. If we look at the shapes that these intervals make on the fretboard, you'll see our major third is up 1 string and down 1 fret. When we look to the 2 chord, and you'll see that first interval is up 1 string and down 2 frets. If we look at these intervals on a single string, we can see that the major third consists of 2 tones, a tone and a tone, making our major third, whereas the minor third consists of 1½ tones, or 1 tone and 1 semitone, 1 tone, 1 semitone, and there's our minor third. So the presence of a minor third interval in the chord tells you that this is a minor chord. The interval of a third is the one that defines the distinction between major and minor chords. So if you have a major third, you have a major chord, you have a minor third, you have a minor chord, and this is denoted by convention by writing the chord number in lowercase Roman numerals. If you looked at the text accompanying this video, you'll have seen that we've written the 2 chord as lowercase II or Roman 2, and the 5 chord as an uppercase V, and the 1 chord as an uppercase I. If we look at the other interval in this chord, we can see quickly that this is the same interval of a fifth that we found in our major triads on the 1 chord and the 5 chord. So the interval of a fifth is considered to be neither major nor minor and is described as a perfect interval. So our major triad consists of a root note with a major third and a perfect fifth. Same for the 5 chord. chord, a root note, a major third, perfect fifth, whereas our 2 chord consists of a root note, minor third, and a perfect fifth, forming a minor triad. I should stress at this point that we're still taking the notes from the major scale, so all these notes are within the major scale. We're still playing in a major key. It's perfectly normal to find minor chords occurring in major keys, and vice versa, major chords appearing in minor keys. So to summarise, our 2-5-1 chord progression consists of a 2 minor chord, a 5 major chord, and a 1 major chord. So sticking with our original key of C, these chords would be in the key of C. The second note is of course a D, so we have a D minor, which we can play as a full chord on the top 4 strings here. Our 5 chord is then a G major, and our 1 chord, naturally enough, C major. So D minor, G major, C major. We can find this chord progression in other keys simply by transposing the same formula. So if we follow the cycle of fifths, we go from C to G. The second note of the G major scale is an A, so our 2-5-1 in G will be an A minor, D major, and a G major. From G we can go 5 to D. The second note of the D major scale is an E, so we have a 2-5-1 chord progression going from E minor to A major to D major. 5 notes up from D brings us to A, where we have 2-5-1 chord progression, B minor, E major, A major. We can extend this through the cycle of fifths until we've learnt the 2-5-1 in all keys, at which point you will have learnt at least one fingering for every minor triad there is, and also reinforced your knowledge of the major triad 1 and 5 chords along the way. As for uses for the 2-5-1, perhaps the most important is to create an extended version of the perfect cadence. If you remember, the perfect cadence is the ending that moves from the 5 chord to the 1 chord. So we can stretch that from the simple 5-1 progression to a 2-5-1, and we have a nice little structure to end a phrase, a verse, a complete song, or whatever. We can illustrate this with a slightly more elaborate version of the 12-bar blues. If we start, as before, with our 1 chord, extended cadence on the end of each verse. Another use of at least the 2-5 progression on its own is as an alternative version of the imperfect cadence. If you remember, the imperfect cadence is an ending that finishes on the 5 chord without returning to the 1 chord. And we saw before we can form an imperfect cadence by moving from the 1 chord to the 5 chord. It's the 1 to the 5. We can also form an imperfect cadence by moving from the 2 chord to the 5 chord. So there you have it, a new chord sequence, some ways to use it, some ways to practice it. In our next video we're going to take a break from all the heavy-duty music theory and look at some practical tips and tricks that you can apply to get the maximum benefit from your practice time in terms of developing your playing technique. So until then, goodbye.